I'm based out of Houston, but I love coming to Austin. I feel a very close connection to the information security community in this city, so it's great to be back at LASCON and hanging out with the folks I've met before and meeting new folks. So I'm here to talk about the Eisenhower and the internet. And you may be thinking immediately, what did Eisenhower have to do with the internet? And furthermore, what does the interstate system have to do with that as well? So I'm going to talk through that, and hopefully this will be a fun journey we're going to take together, a little historical journey. Let me continue introducing myself. I'm technical director for NCC Group North America. Tell you more about NCC Group in a second. I've been in IT since 1995 and started focusing on InfoSec in 2001. I'm a Louisiana native, but as we say, I got to Texas as fast as I could about 22 years ago. Studied music at LSU, as David mentioned, and I went to grad school in 2005 to try and make myself feel like a legit InfoSec person. Hasn't worked yet, but I spent most of my career doing blue team information security. The biggest industries in Houston are healthcare and oil and gas, but I've also done a little bit of work for the DoD and aerospace in Houston at Johnson Space Center. So that's me. Oh, and I know I've been told I need to update my profile picture that was used online. Yeah, my beard's had significant gains since then. So I have the greatest job in the world, I think. I get to do a lot of these sorts of shows, and I love advocating for you, my fellow information security professionals, and also advocating for our industry. It's part of my job, and I really, really enjoy it. But because NCC Group is sponsoring me being here, you have to sit through this short commercial. Sorry, I'll keep it brief. We've got about 2,000 employees globally, 35 offices across the globe. We were founded in 1999. We're traded on the London Stock Exchange. We're part of the FTSE 200. And last fiscal year, we generated $313 million US in revenue. So it's a good company. Please hire us. I'll get that in a minute. So yeah, we've in North America, a lot of our growth was through acquisition. There are several firms listed up there that are now part of NCC Group. We've got a variety of consulting services from, in North America, we were primarily thought of as red teamers. We also have other services we provide as well, as you can see. And I show you this slide to say that here's our office locations. I'm very, very hopeful that in 2019, I'll be adding Houston to that list. We're hoping to have brick and mortar offices in Houston. For the longest time, I was the only employee working remote there, but we're up to 4 employees in Houston now, and I'm joined by one of them today, my colleague, Mario Zayas. Oh, there you are, is in town. So say hi to him if you haven't met him. He's our first Houston-based account manager, so hopefully he'll buy you coffee or a beer or something. All right, let's get into it. This deck started when a young colleague of mine once asked, we were talking about security problems that are very pervasive when you're talking about communicating on the internet. And they're just fundamental problems with things like authentication and protocols that are broken and those sorts of things. And he said, why didn't they think of that? And my initial thought was, geez, kid, what a naive question. And then moments later I thought, well, wait. No, it's actually a really good question. Why didn't they think of that? And I didn't know the answer. So it was a pet project. And I just wanted to try and figure out, okay, how did we get to where we are now? And how did the internet really start to begin with? And the metaphor, the information superhighway is what we called it for the longest time. And so it occurred to me that I should start by studying and trying to understand another big infrastructure that was started by the government. And so let's start by talking about Eisenhower and the interstate. Bear with me, trust me, I'll bring this together. It started in 1919. There were 80 military vehicles. Then Lieutenant Colonel Eisenhower was tasked with getting those 80 vehicles 3,000 miles across the country. It took 2 months. And as you can see from the picture on that side, it was fraught with problems. There was no consistent infrastructure being used. There weren't good roads. Things were running off into ditches, and it was just a mess. Fast forward to the 1930s, and Eisenhower found himself in Germany. There was something going on in Europe at the time. And Germany had already built the Autobahn, which was a national system of roads that they could use to very efficiently get around Germany. And Eisenhower thought that was a really good idea, and America should do something like that. And because of that, once he became president, he realized that he had the power then to ask Congress to pass the Federal Aid Highway Act of 1956. So he is really known as the father of the interstate system. To honor him for that, Congress passed a bill in 1990 that legally changed the name to the Eisenhower Interstate System. So if you've ever been driving around an interstate, maybe you'll see one of these blue signs from time to time, and that's why it's called that, because Eisenhower came up with that. And you know what's happened? I mean, in this country, we love our cars. In Texas specifically, we love our big pickup trucks. I drive a half-ton pickup truck for no real reason at all, but I love it. Car culture is not just a big deal in this country. Is anyone familiar with the Michelin Guide? Okay, so it's a book, and it lists restaurants, and very nice restaurants, and however many stars you get, it's a nicer restaurant. It's no coincidence that it shares the name with the tire company, because it is Michelin Tire that publishes that book. And you might think, well, why would a tire company want to publish a book about fancy restaurants? The answer is the Michelin folks figured that if they could convince French people to drive around to these fancy restaurants, then they would have to buy more tires. So that shows you that infrastructure being in place in Europe had a really big socio-economic impact, right? Think about historic Route 66 in America. Now, Route 66 is not a part of the interstate system because it was built before the Interstate Act happened. But entire cities and towns sprung up based on their proximity to Route 66. And then when the interstate system happened and people stopped using Route 66, those towns in many cases dried up and went away. Again, those economic impacts that that infrastructure had on those local areas. And of course, screenshot from the movie Cars, if you have kids, or not, perhaps you've seen the movie, but it's a big deal. Oh, trivia question. Does anyone know where the middle of Route 66 is? Nope. It's right here in Texas. Does anyone know where Adrian, Texas is? I should look that up. I'm not sure where that is, but it's in the middle of Texas. So what's my point? What started as an infrastructure built for a very specific use case ended up having a profound socioeconomic and sociological effect once turned over to the private sector. Because Eisenhower didn't just say, we're going to build all these roads and move military vehicles around. While we're not using them for moving around military vehicles, other folks can use the system of roads as well. And as it turns out, it became a big deal. The ability for us to freely move about our country easily, as big as it is a significant advantage for us. So, similarly, ARPA was founded, and I'll tell you why. They had a problem. Sputnik happened in the 50s, and America was shocked. They didn't know that Russia even had that capability. They didn't know that they were even doing that sort of research. And the government knew that somebody needed to be in charge of researching things to figure out what's going on. They knew they couldn't do it alone, though, so the DoD partnered in terms of with private researching organizations, depending on what the research project was. And that's how the Advanced Research Projects Agency came up, and guess who founded that? It was Eisenhower. So he had a keen eye, it seems, for figuring out how to solve fairly complex problems. Just as a point of saying it, in 1972, the name was changed to DARPA, which is the DoD, Advanced Research Projects Agency, to kind of underscore how important the notion of defense is to that agency. They initially started off, as I said, it was in response to Sputnik, but they shortly, a couple years after that, in the 1960s, NASA was founded and took over all the space travel related things. ARPA at that time decided, okay, we're going to focus on computer science problems. So the idea was, if all of our computing resources are in one place, that's a single point of failure. We need to have the ability, in order to defend our country, to be able to exchange information across great distance. Well, the technology didn't exist at the time. You know, there was only so far you could stretch a cable, right? So ARPA decided they were going to try and solve that problem. Again, researchers from all over the world were involved. New protocols had to be invented. Packet switching had to be invented. And this is what the first 4 nodes of the internet looked like, is in several research facilities in the United States. And I mean, it would be nice if the network to be protected were that simple, right? Have you seen a topology map of the internet lately? Well, it's grown. It's a lot bigger. It doesn't even resemble a network map at all. But you know, from those humble beginnings, you know, we deal with the internet every single day. You know, again, suffice to say, it's gotten a lot bigger. The first message, so if you want to talk about, you know, when did the internet go live, the research I did seems to suggest most people agree it was on October 29th, 1969 at 22:30. One researcher was trying to remotely log into another machine. That researcher typed LO, and then the whole bloody thing crashed. It took several hours to reboot the internet, which it's funny even saying that. But eventually that message, the paper I read said that they were trying to type log in. I would like to use this forum to start the rumor that they were in fact trying to type LOL. So we can all go home and tell our kids that LOL is not a new thing. That's been around since the 60s. So in terms of, I mean, part of the question I was trying to answer for myself was, you know, when was the internet invented and by whom? Because, you know, every time I give this presentation, someone will make the Al Gore invented the internet joke. More on him later. But there were, as I said, it was the Department of Defense that had the idea, but literally people from all over the world were involved, and I don't think it's fair to necessarily say one entity or one organization is responsible for all the research that went into it. So my conclusion is this vague comment here: it was invented by humans in the 20th century. I mean, there were a lot of folks that were involved in that. Just as with the interstate system, there was a very specific problem that they were trying to solve. And so in terms of the question, why didn't they think of that? Think about, in the early days, the DoD, you had to be in the military or a part of the DoD or a part of one of these research firms. So there were no design requirements for dealing with unauthorized users, for example. There were no unauthorized users. You were in the DoD somehow. And non-private networks, we didn't have a way to deal with that because, again, there were no non-private networks. There was just one internet, and everybody that was using it was a part of that network. So in terms of, as security professionals, thinking about, why do we still have clear text protocols? Why did we even have clear text protocols to begin with? And so on and so forth. The answer is not that the people that built the internet were, naive or foolish. There was no design requirement. And if you're engineering a solution to something, you're not going to solve a problem unless there's a design requirement behind it, right? So the fact is, the internet was not at all designed to do what we're doing with it today. So what happened? Well, e-commerce happened. Interestingly, I found out that UUNet is claimed to be the first not-for-profit internet service provider in something like 1988. They went for-profit in 1990. The World was an organization that offered full internet access in 1989. Well, what do you mean by full internet access? Before 1989, even if you did have access to the internet, ARPA would keep some stuff segregated off, and as private citizens, we could only access certain parts of the internet as it existed. That changed, as I said, in 1989. Full access was finally granted to non-ARPA approved users by 1992. And so I started going back in time thinking, well, when was my first internet access account? Because that seems like really late. I didn't think it was 1992 before ARPA started releasing control of it. Commercial applications remained prohibited until 1995. And that's when eBay and Amazon happened around that time. So before 1995, as private citizens, we could use the internet, but we couldn't sell stuff on it. Again, it wasn't in the design. It wasn't built to do that. So ARPA said, no, don't be doing that, please. That having been said, it's not that e-commerce didn't happen. The first e-commerce is believed to have happened in 1971 or 72, somewhere around there, where some college kids sold a bag of weed to each other. I'm certainly not advocating for anything. I'm just stating the facts. That's what happened. It might close some loops about our industry, though, come to think of it, wouldn't it? All right, so the security concept I'm getting at, and the thing that I hope is interesting to you as it is to me, is that, as I've said, the initial design requirements of this infrastructure, the initial design requirements of anything you're building is not necessarily what it becomes. ARPA was specifically interested in computational time sharing across great distance. You know, they wanted one computer in one state to talk to another computer in another state, and they, engaged academia to help them out with that. So Eisenhower's interstate system fueled America's love for road trips and travel beyond, what it ended up doing was far beyond the scope of what Eisenhower had in mind when he asked Congress to fund that. And certainly we have far exceeded ARPA's goals from the 1950s and 1960s. So whenever you give, if any of you do public speaking, giving predictions is always a risky thing, especially when it's being recorded. I'm happy to be wrong on some of this stuff. But what have we seen that's happened with roads? Well, I found a project called 80 Smart Corridor. And they have a lot of really interesting information about the research this organization is doing on how to make travel on interstates more efficient. And they do things like, metered ramps. If you've seen those, the flow of traffic entering the main lanes is controlled to try and reduce bottlenecks and what. Overhead signs that will tell you if lanes are closed, and you can use overhead signs to reverse the flow of traffic during certain times of day. And local street signs that can provide quick and efficient information about detours, again, with the idea of making road travel more efficient. So roads started, or interstates rather, started as a hard, flat surface, right? I mean, that's what it was. Now we've got things like adaptive construction materials, toll roads, sophisticated lighting, dynamic lanes, self-driving cars. So we've come a long way from a hard, flat surface, right? So what I think, if you kind of stretch that metaphor a little bit, what is the internet going to do based on what we now know about the interstate system? It started off as a networking infrastructure. Oh, internetworking. By the way, trivia. The in the early white papers and technical documents that ARPA was authoring, they talked about internetworking was what they called this thing that they were trying to do. That was later shortened to just internet. So if you ever wondered where they came up with the name internet, it's the shortened version of internet working. Recently, I read in a style guide, I do a lot of technical writing, that once upon a time, internet was a proper noun and therefore should be capitalized all the time. Some style guides now say it's okay to use a lowercase I, and it drives me insane. Maybe I'm just old school and resistant to change, but internet should always have a capital I. My consultants, I drive them nuts with edits on that one. So I think just as we've improved the materials we've built roads with, I think we've already seen a lot of things happening. Math-based encryption will include elements of quantum computing that's, very difficult, if not impossible, theoretically, to defeat. Broadband's going to become more and more broad. Our pipes are going to get bigger, and it'll become more and more ubiquitous as well. There's a lot of people in the world that don't have access to the internet. If you think about it in context of, this was a network designed by and for computer scientists, right? And the way you support such a network with computer scientists is different than when suddenly you introduce, mere mortal humans that are using it, right? As that population of users increases and we're able to transfer more and more data faster and faster, I think even though we're making inroads in solving some of these security problems, I think it might actually get worse as those users, the population of users increases. I also think one side effect of those previous two bullet points is going to be that physical possession will continue to lose value, and access to information itself is really what's going to be important to us as we continue moving through the 21st century. So as David mentioned, and I mentioned, I have a degree in music, so if you would imagine what my CD collection must look like, you'd probably think, wow, he's probably got a pretty impressive collection of CDs and records. Well, shockingly, I don't own a single one. I've gotten rid of them all because now all the music I listen to is on a cloud service somewhere, and I'm perfectly happy to use such services so I don't have to manage physical inventory of things. What's important to me is not the CD, it's just having access to the information. And since I've written this slide deck since then, if you're a consultant yourself or in your own organizations, does cloud computing ever come up in conversations around the office? I mean, we can stamp our feet and clench our fists all we want, but I don't think it's going away. I think it's here to stay. And in fact, I think last night when I was up on stage, I referred to the internet as a fad at some point. Yeah, it's not going away. And I think we've also seen, since my IT career started, we've kind of seen InfoSec challenges moving up the OSI model. In the 90s, every security problem at the end of the day was a routing and switching problem, it seemed like. It was layer 3 issues and that was it. Then, OWASP happened. I just remember where I was. So obviously, application layer attacks are a thing and have become very, very important. And I think that migration up the stack is going to continue to layer 8, which of course is the user or the chair keyboard interface, to use the technical term. And so I think even as we get better at defending our applications and defending our networks, the human is the softest target. And we've already seen phishing getting more and more sophisticated. Even there's time-based attacks on one-time passwords and multi-factor authentication. I think that trend is going to continue as well. I'm happy to be wrong, and if you have predictions of your own, I'm happy to hear about those also. So just as I mentioned the smart highways and self-driving cars, did you know that there's a second internet? The Internet 2 project was started specifically to kind of solve some of these problems of this infrastructure being designed and built starting a very long time ago. it's an interesting project, and I'm not sure that it's ever going to, like, we're going to have an internet outage one day and turn the whole thing off and switch everything over to the internet too. I think as that research continues, elements of that technology will be incorporated into the global internet. But if you don't know much about it, yeah, it's worth looking into. Oh, and one prediction I left out, sorry, is self-driving cars. Does anyone have an automobile that has driver assist or self-driving features, anything like that? I mean, so I think that's cool. I cannot wait till I have a fully autonomous vehicle. I love driving my big pickup truck, but driving around Houston, if you've ever had to do so, well, I mean, that's why my beard is gray. It didn't used to be this way. It's maddening, but will self-driving cars solve the problem of automobile accidents, in your opinion? I mean, even if they can communicate with one another and the humans just ballast at that point, will accidents still happen? I'm cynical enough that I think they will, because humans remain capable of making bad decisions. And so even if the car is driving itself, I don't trust myself or other humans, for that matter, to not mess with it somehow and make it malfunction. I mentioned quantum encryption a minute ago. So, I mean, even if you believe that in theory quantum encryption cannot be defeated because of the uncertainty principle and all the science behind it, will attackers still be able to steal someone's data in the future? Of course they will, because humans are going to make bad decisions and we're going to implement it improperly, and something's going to happen and a hacker's still going to be able to steal our data. I know that sounds really, really cynical, but we're all information security pros here. I think it bodes well, because the problem's not really going to go away. It's going to change, and it's going to keep moving around. You know, we solve one problem and then another problem pops up. And that's why this topic was so interesting to me, trying to figure out, okay, the problems we're solving today, you know, maybe we will solve them at some point. But another one's going to come up. And I really think that layer 8, as I call it, the human layer, is where the attacks are going to continue to be concentrated. I know, by the way, that I've got the enviable spot of being immediately before lunch. Let me pause for a minute to thank you all for being here. And trust me, I'm just as interested in lunch as you are. So lucky for you, this is one of my briefer slide decks that I give. So let me start to wrap it up here. All that having been said, I told you a story about interstates. I told you a story about the internet and a little bit of a history lesson. I believe this pretty strongly, that as security professionals, it's not enough just to understand how the technology works. I mean, obviously, we have to understand how the technology works. But more importantly, I think if you believe that layer 8 is going to be the problem, where the problem goes moving forward, then we also have to understand how the people interact with that technology. The context of how the technology is used is what the hackers, the bad guys, are really good at figuring out before we do, and they take advantage of that. So again, not to repeat myself, but just as interstates don't require you to be in a military vehicle, the internet doesn't you don't have to be in the DoD to use the internet anymore. It has long ceased being a thing only used by computer scientists. And I mentioned cloud, and if any of you who were in the industry 20 years ago, did you anticipate that we were going to be dealing with the things that people were going to be putting computing assets and information assets in somebody else's data center? I remember the first time I heard the term BYOD at a conference, and the speaker was suggesting that someday you'll be able to buy your own computing devices and bring them to work. I was sitting there thinking, you're out of your mind, dude. You've obviously never worked in a corporate network before, because that's not happening ever. Well, now there's an entire industry built up around mobile device management and those sorts of things. So anyway, in closing, like I said, I think our jobs may become more focused on the use cases and how our users interact with the thing. If you have ideas of your own, I would love to hear them. I'm not claiming to be right on this stuff. I'm happy to be wrong, or if you disagree, I'd love to hear your opinions. if not today. Please do stay in touch. I'm on Twitter, and there's my email address. You can hit me up there. It's unfortunate that I've got to be back in Houston by 3:30 or 4, so I need to leave pretty soon. But anyway, this is my story. Comments or questions? Hard to see. I don't see any hands going up. Thank you very much for your time today. I hope you enjoyed it, and enjoy the rest of LASCON. Thank you.